They say silence is weakness, that quiet people fade in a world that rewards the loudest voice. But what if silence isn't weakness at all? What if it's the kind of strength most people will never understand? This is the story of Rohan, the quiet boy who taught an entire kingdom that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply breathes. Rohan grew up in a small town near the king's palace. He was gentle, observant, always calm. While other children played and shouted, Rohan sat near the river, watching ripples chase each other across the water. He noticed things others missed, the sound of wind against trees, the rhythm of the current, the language of nature. But to the world, he was strange. People laughed. He never speaks, they'd say. He must be weak. Even his teachers whispered, he's too quiet to ever stand out. Yet Rohan never argued. He didn't defend himself. He simply smiled, because deep inside he knew something they didn't. Silence wasn't weakness, it was awareness. One morning, the town square filled with trumpets and drums. The king himself had arrived. Beside him, a soldier carried a shining chest overflowing with gold coins. The people gasped as the king raised his hand and spoke. "My people," he declared, "our kingdom needs a boy who is not just strong but wise, not loud, but patient. Whoever passes my 3 tests will serve in the royal palace and earn this treasure." Excitement filled the air. Dozens of boys lined up, full of pride and confidence, and in the back stood Rohan, quiet, steady, unnoticed. The crowd laughed. He doesn't even talk. How will he win gold? But Rohan said nothing. He simply bowed his head. The first test was to cross the wide river beyond the town. There was no bridge, no boat. Each boy had to find his own way across. At the signal, they all rushed forward, shouting, splashing, slipping on the rocks. Some panicked, some gave up. But Rohan stood still for a moment, watching the flow. He noticed where the current slowed, where the stones stood firm. Then he began, slow, careful, one step at a time. When he finally reached the other side, drenched but calm, the king's advisor leaned toward the throne and whispered. He moved slowly, but wisely. The second test took place in the royal garden. The challenge: find a single white flower hidden among hundreds of green leaves in just 15 minutes. The others ran wildly through the garden, tearing branches, shouting to each other. But Rohan stayed still. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and listened. Then he saw them, butterflies, gliding toward a quiet corner of the garden. He followed silently, lifted a leaf, and there it was, the white flower, untouched and perfect. He presented it to the king, who asked, "How did you find it so fast?" Rohan bowed and said softly, "When you are silent long enough, even nature begins to speak." The final test was held in the great royal hall. The king sat tall on his throne and asked each boy the same question. "What is stronger than a sword, yet makes no sound?" One by one, the boys answered. "Gold," said one. "Knowledge," said another. "Courage," shouted a third. But the king only shook his head. When it was Rohan's turn, he stepped forward quietly. He didn't rush to answer. He closed his eyes, thought deeply, then said in a calm voice, "Patience, my king." The room fell silent. The king leaned forward. "Why patience?" Rohan replied, "A sword can win battles, but patience wins wars. A sword can cut, but patience can heal. A sword creates fear, but patience earns respect, and respect lasts longer than fear." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the king smiled and clapped. "Young boy, you have spoken with truth. You have wisdom beyond your years." The next morning, the royal messenger stood before the entire town and announced, "The winner of the king's challenge and the honor of serving in the palace is Rohan." The quiet boy. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some boys frowned in disbelief. How could he win? He barely speaks. But the old village elder smiled and said, "Because sometimes the one who listens understands more than the one who shouts." From that day on, Rohan served beside the king. He still spoke little, but whenever he did, everyone listened. His words came from thought, not noise. From truth, not pride. Years passed and Rohan became known across the land, not as the loudest man, but as the wisest. And maybe this story is also yours. Maybe you've been told you're too quiet, that your silence means weakness. But it doesn't. Silence means you're listening, learning, growing. It means you understand what others only hear. Don't waste energy proving yourself with noise. Prove yourself with patience. Because the world doesn't always notice the loudest, but it always remembers the ones who lead with calm. And remember, success doesn't always shout, but it always leaves a mark. If this story moved your heart, share it. And if you want to hear more tales that remind you of your power, don't forget to subscribe, because somewhere out there, someone needs this story today.